2. So what kind of place is the main town of this floor? Asuna strode south, up the white hill, and the soles in her leather boots grinding against the sand. She was back in her usual outfit of hooded cape and leather skirt. I tried to recall the site of the town. I was back into my customary black coat. You know what? Forget it. We'll be there in a minute, and I'd rather see it for myself. That's a good idea. It's one of the fun things about MMORPGs, I agreed, but the sight of the stone-built town was already flooding back into my mind from memory. If anything, it was not particularly memorable town. Compared to the mountain-carved city of the second floor or the monstrous baobabs on the third, this one was structurally quite plain. If there was any odd feature to mention, it was that the entrance of every house was on the second floor, for some reason. In order to get inside, you had to use a set of stone stairs. "Oh, there's a gate," Asuna called, her voice about 20% more excited than normal. A mossy stone arch was coming into view atop of the hill. I glanced down at my window, which was still open from putting my gears back on. It was nearly 2 o'clock. A few minutes after reaching the 4th floor, a few minutes at the water's edge, a few minutes with the donut tree, these all added up to about 50 minutes since we conquered the boss of the 3rd floor. There must be many players down below at this exact moment, just waiting for the teleport gate to open to a new town. I felt bad that we'd taken this long to activate the gate, but they'd understand when they saw the lack of a footpath. I followed after the fencer, and she trotted up the hill. When she reached the arch a step before I did, Asuna bubbled with excitement. "Wow, it's so pretty here!" Pretty? All I remembered was a drab gray town. I strode up the last several lengths, curious now. The instant I passed through the cobblestone arch, the countless lights flashed in my eyes. The plain, boring town in the squared hollow I remembered from the beta was now sparkling like a jewel. The source of the light was a midday sun, glittered off the solid blue water. Everything that had been stone-paved street before now was a deep water. The stone of the building had gone from a dull gray bright white, which made the entire place look like a city of chalk floating in the middle of the square lake. On a sheer beauty, it's easily eclipsed by those on the 2nd and 3rd floor. No wonder, Asuna exclaimed in wonder. I see. This was supposed to be the finished version all along. That explains the doors on the 2nd floor, I murmured. My partner waved over impatiently. "Come on, hurry!" "Coming!" We continued along the stone path, which is now descending. On the descent, a thought occurred to me. The theme for the 4th floor had to be waterways. Once through the massive front gate of the town, Safe Haven labeled appeared in my field of view. Up ahead was a dock, good 100 feet across, complete with a number of small boats helmed by NPCs. "Oh, look at the gondolas! It's just like Venice!" Asuna marveled. I started to wonder if she had only seen Venice in pictures, or if she'd really been there. Then snapped myself out of it. It didn't feel right to wonder about her personal life. The streets ended at the dock, so we needed to use the gondola to get anywhere in town. I suppose we had the option of taking those swim tubes back out of storage, but Asuna's eyes were currently gondola-shaped. So I took the hint that my idea would have been shot down instantly. I didn't exactly relish the thought of showing off my cow boxers either, even if they weren't any other actual players in town yet. The gondolas at the dock came in a wealth of sizes, from small to one-person boats, aside from the NPC gondoliers, up to the large cruisers that could seat 10 or more. A number of copper plaques listed the prices, indicating that a 2-person gondola cost 50 coal for a one-time use. It was good to know that the price would be the same no matter where in town we were, but I didn't like the idea of paying 50 coal every time we wanted to visit a new place. For the moment, we didn't have a better option. "Will this one do?" I asked, pointing out a nearby ivory white 2-seater. Asuna gave it a serious examination and nodded. We were headed down the steps of the dock and hopped into the gondolas. Asuna first. The burly gondolier, his traditional straw hat and striped shirt, gave us a friendly greeting.
Welcome to Rovia, travelers. 50 col, whenever you want to go.
Take us to the teleporter plaza then, I answered, then wondered if the NPC would understand that terminology. Fortunately, he tipped the brim of his cap in acknowledgement.
Off we go!
He shouted. A purple payment window appeared briefly, then vanished. The gondolier gave a push of his long oar. The white ship slid away, and at the prow, Asuna pulled her hood back and cheered again. The gondola left the dock at the north end of the city behind and headed to town, the cross-shaped main street that split the town into 4 quarters. No, not the main street, a main... Hey, Asuna, what's the English word for waterway? Channel. The main channel of town. Boats of all colors filled the wide canal, which was a good 60 feet wide, with shops large and small lining the sides. The displays of weapons, armor, and items were very tempting to me, but it would not be easy to take detours in this situation. No doubt we would change destinations on the fly, but I had a feeling that every time we stepped off the boat, it would cost another 50 to get on again. On top of that, I didn't even know if gondolas would wait for us there. I told myself that we had to prioritize activating the town's teleporter and asked the gondolier a different question. Will this boat take us outside the town as well? Fortunately, this question was part of his recognized list, and he gave a proper answer, as he's rowed the powerful oar.
I'm afraid I cannot do that. I only work here, in the town of Rovia.
Would another ship take us out of town?
Sorry, I cannot answer that.
Either the question didn't fit his recognized parameters, or there was a reason he couldn't answer it. There were plenty of other things I wanted to know, but based on my experience in the beta, the most in-depth information on a town had to come from the right NPC, like a bearded elder, a fishy informant, or a know-it-all child. For a moment, I reminded the dark elf knight and her stunning realistic vocabulary, but they were things done before I couldn't dwell on my loneliness. We'll open the gate, take a short rest, then go out collecting information, I told myself. A large wharf appeared ahead, and in the teleport gate plaza at the center of the town, the gondolier drew out the boat level to the dock at the southern end of the square with expert skill, then put his hand to his cap again.
Safe and sound. Hope to see you again.
We thanked him and stepped off the boat. As I feared, the gondola immediately pulled away from the wharf and headed back to the entrance of the town. But there were other gondolas at the dock here, so we could use them on the way back. Opening the teleporter quickly was a matter at hand. When I turned, I found Asuna still had stars floating in her eyes. That was so much fun! I'm glad you enjoyed it. Let's write another one back. I don't think we have another option. I almost had to wonder if she was really on the same cool-headed, snarky fencer I had been working with all this time. An hour after defeating the boss on the 3rd floor, Asuna and I activated the teleporter gate for the 4th floor and retreated to a corner of the plaza to watch the swarm of players that came barreling through the wavering blue portal. The rush of tourists here for the custom of town opening stood around clump within the plaza and marveled at the beauty of town. But more than a few seemed to have a clear purpose in mind already. Middle-of-the-pack swordsmen who headed to the market area in search of better weapons, merchants after more valuable items to stock, and even a short-haired girl with a blacksmith's hammer at her waist, poring over a map of the town. Glad to see there were more fighters trying to catch up to the frontier group, and crafters offering players support. I joined Asuna in entering a small inn at the outer edge of the plaza. We got 2 rooms this time, to avoid the mistake that happened in Zoomfoot down at the 3rd floor, We ended up to have a meeting about our plan for the near future before we could lie down for a rest. Therefore, we ended up on the sofas in my room. As usual, I had to be wary that her unnecessary danger radar was at max sensitivity, but with the gondola effect still active in her expression, her features were relaxed. I took a sip of tea from the set that was left in the room and looked at Asuna across from me. Do you like the ships? She blinked a few times and smiled shyly. Not the ships as a whole, really, but I've always wanted to ride in a gondola. I just never thought that dream would come true in Einkrad. I see. So it's not all that bad that the fourth floor got filled with water then? I noted. She seemed to realize something. Oh, so there weren't any of these canals and channels in the beta? Correct. It was just a boring, dusty gray town. I barely remembered anything about it. Then I like this one much more. I know the gondolas don't go out of town, so we'll probably have to deal with more swimming, but I can deal with it. Despite being totally entranced with the boat ride, she'd still taken every word in the conversation I had with the gondolier. I couldn't help but smile with her capable nature. That's right. As for what's next, we should take a break, then resupply, repair, and replace our stuff here in the town, accept all the available quests, and find out as much info as we can about the fourth floor. Eventually, we'll have to leave the town for other locations, which means using those swim tubes again. A dreamy look steadily faded from Asuna's eyes, replaced by her typical, cool expression. I can handle the swimming. The problem is monsters. That lizard tadpole thing earlier was a bit of a letdown when the body was barely larger than the fin. But I still have a bright red cursor, right? That meant it was pretty high level. Exactly. And obviously that won't be the species monsters in this floor. We'd better try to outfit ourselves for underwater combat. I only had a tiny bit of experience from that with the beta. Not only did players have to deal with taking a hold and holding breaths, but the resistance from the water was fierce as well. Fighters with big weapons had to be able to handle those weapons, while those with smaller weapons could only be so agile in the water. The most suited to the water were spear-type weapons, while their long reach and jabbing attacks that met with minimal resistance from the water, and neither Asuna nor I had any spears. It was unrealistic to start training now, but Asuna could do her best with spear-like jabbing from her rapier, and I could limit myself to thrusting skills. Suddenly, Asuna set down her tea and shouted, "Oh, right! I forgot! I need to make a swimsuit!" You were serious about that? Of course! I think I saw them selling some at the shops, but it would be a waste to spend the money when I've already got the tailoring skill. Well, you've got a point. Can I ask you to make me some swim trunks too? Nice plain ones with no bowl mark? Should I design it with that finned tadpole instead? I was going to plead against it, but something else occurred to me first. Wait, hang on. What do you mean? I haven't even started. No, I mean I'm thinking. I squinted, trying to pull the relevant information out of that conversation we had about tailoring back in the Dark Elf camp on the third floor. On the second floor, I'd seen the mountain of underwear that came from out of Asuna's inventory. Those weren't meant to be worn, but were a byproduct of her training to raise her skill proficiency. Afterwards, she'd mentioned that she'd already taken the tailoring skill out of its slot. No, it won't work. What won't? You don't have a tailoring in one of your slots anymore, do you? This might come as a shock if you don't know already, but once you remove a skill from its slot, its proficiency goes back to 0, I explained. She nodded without batting an eye. I might be a beginner, but I even know that. Besides, it pops up with a warning when you remove the skill from the slot. Oh, good. Are you going to train it up from nothing again? She shook her head exasperately. It might be a hard work, but I'm not that patient. As a matter of fact, Asuna opened her game window, a skeptical look on her face. Then she flipped over her inventory storage and materialized a small item. A small crystal bottle shaped like a nut trunked down onto the coffee table. There was a small amount of faintly glowing blue liquid inside the transparent bottle. What's this? You didn't see one in the beta? No, not that I remember. I reached out to pick it up the vial. She quickly cut me off. Stop. If you don't know what it is, don't you dare open it up. I know, I was just going to read the description. I'm serious about that. Her stern admonition made me just want to pop it open and gulp it down in one swift movement. But I wasn't trying to outstage the comedian, so I behaved myself. Carefully picking it up as not to disturb the glass lid, I was surprised at how heavy it was for just being 3 inches long. I tapped the inside of the hourglass with a fingertip and examined the properties of the window that appeared. It's called a crystal bottle of Kela. Never heard of it. Let's see here. This bottle allows you to save the proficiencies of any skill currently equipped in a skill slot. Uh-huh. About 3 seconds passed. What? The shockwave of my scream put cracks in the walls, tears in the down blanket, and shattered every window in the room. Okay, in reality, it just caused a mere ripple on the surface of the teacup, but it certainly felt like it had some kind of destructive impact. My mouth was frozen open in shock. Asuna pulled the bottle out of my fingers and fiddled with the settings in the properties window, then promptly pulled out the stopper. The liquid at the bottom of the vial turned into a blue light that floated up into the air. She took a deep breath and sucked it into her nostrils, then breathed yellow light back into the bottle before replacing the cap. The contents now looked like lemon oil. She put the bottle back onto the table and smiled at me. Now my tailoring skill is back to its previous level, and my sprint skill level is saved in the bottle. I see. So, if I might ask, where did you get that item? It was kind of chaotic, so I couldn't tell, but I think it was that one time. Remember right after we reached the 3rd floor, and we helped Kismel fight the Forest Elf Knight? I think it must have dropped from the Elf Knight. Oh, I nodded. I'm still not over the shock. Now that she mentioned it, Keala was the name of the Forest Elf Nation that once existed down on the surface, according to Kismel's tale. In fact, that overwhelmingly powerful elf warrior, strong enough that players should normally be unable to win as it was a story event battle, had dropped a number of fairly rare items for me as well. But I was so startled by Kismel's very un-NPC-like dialogue that I never went back to check the loot out. Asuna couldn't have figured out the properties of the crystal bottle until later that night at the earliest. We didn't describe or ask each other what skill choices or inventory contents unless it was absolutely necessary. So a week had passed without me even knowing that Asuna had such a tremendous valuable item. Are you going to sit there and shock the whole time? If we're done talking, can I go to my room and start making swimsuits now? She asked. It broke me out of my paralysis effect. I mumbled, trying to organize my thoughts, and held up my hands. Just hang on. There are a few more things I want to be sure of. All right, but why don't you just settle down first? Yeah. I gulped down my cold tea and let out a long breath. The crystal bottle of Kela was still sitting right there on the table. I stared at the sparkling yellow liquid made of pure skill proficiency. The liquid filled about 1/17th capacity of the vial. Assuming Asuna's sprint skill had been around 50 or so, the amount of liquid directly correlated to the proficiency when this bottle could even save a completed skill at the maximum proficiency of 1,000. I took one more deep breath and looked up at her. Have you ever told any other player aside from me about this bottle? The fencer shrugged and shook her head. You're sure? Not even Argo? Listen, you've been traveling with me for an entire week since I got this item. When would have I had a chance to meet with Argo behind your back? Oh, good point. I felt relief flooding into me, but Asuna was still shooting me a skeptical look. What's with the overblown reaction? All this bottle does is let you put a skill level and take it out. You still have to work to raise it. You're acting like its drinking will automatically give you 100 skill points or something. If is it that big of a deal? I was both stunned by my temporary partner was saying and resigned. Apparently, this was just how non-RPG players thought. I tried to my best to make her understand my surprise and apprehension. The thing is, like I said, you lose your skill progress in SAO when you remove a skill from its slot. So at level 16, like I am, I can only improve 4 skills at any one time. I know that. You've got one-handed swords, martial arts, search, and hiding, is it? She knows. But it was too late to be alarmed by this point. I cleared my throat and continued. Yeah. Anyway, I'm seriously wondering if I should remove hiding skills so I can equip swimming instead. There's a swimming skill? What happens if you use it? You can swim faster. There's not as much water resistance, and you can probably move longer underwater. It's a real help on this floor, but I probably won't end up using it. The terrain is bound to change in the next floor, so I wouldn't be giving up on all the hard work I've put into hiding, just for the sake of this one floor. So with that bottle there, you could save your other skills where it is, and temporary set swimming skill is just a slot for this floor. Exactly. Every single player who comes to this floor is going to have to face that hard choice. If the word gets out that a player with a magic bottle can save your skill progress, you're going to get harassed by people looking to buy it, snooping around, and prying for information and so on. There was another, much darker possibility that I could see arising, but I chose not to mention it. Asuna reached out and picked up the crystal bottle to stare at it, appreciating its true value for the first time. I see. Now that I think about it, Neza from the Legend Braves could have used this bottle to earn martial arts without having to give up on one-handed swords. Since it effectively gives you an extra skill slot, I guess I can see why people would make a big fuss about it. As usual, she latched onto the concept very quickly for a beginner. Asuna looked up and went on, speaking faster than usual. What if we just went ahead and released all the information we had about this thing? If we tell Argo, she'll put it in her strategy guide, right? Then no one will need to come ask us. Yeah, I'm not saying that we should cover up its existence, but I leaned over, rested my chin on my folded hands, thinking hard. The problem is, the Forest Elven Hollowed Knight that you got the bottle from is only available to fight during that event in the Battle of Forest of Wavering Mists on the 3rd floor. At this point, you basically only get one opportunity. I'm guessing that the majority of players in the front line, like Cabau's Ironclad Liberation Squad and Lynch Dragon Knights Brigade, have already beaten the event in the normal way by now. I see. So it's kind of too late to publicize the information now? Yeah, plus, it's not like it's going to be easy to beat him, even if you still had the opportunity. We managed to do it, didn't we? She said simply. I had to admit that she was right, but I had my doubts. I scratched my bangs and admitted something that had been on my mind for a while. How long suppose you were able to beat the forest elf anyway? In the short silence that followed, I remembered a conversation that I had with Kismel at the bathing tent of the Dark Elf outpost. She claimed she had been having strange dreams lately. In the dream, Kismel was fighting a powerful forest elf knight in the middle of the duel. I showed up with a number of companions, none of which were Asuna, and we helped fight her, but no one was able to handle the forest elf, and the group fell one right after the other, until Kismel was forced to release the protection of the holding tree to save our lives, thus perishing herself. Aside from the question of why an NPC would be dreaming of it, an NPC actually slept in the true sense of this world, one thing stood out. The content of that dream was eerily similar to my experience with the Jade Key quest during the beta test of SAO. Kismel was an extremely special NPC with highly advanced AI. That much was clear. Was that the reason she maintained a memory from far back as the beta? Or was it the presence of that memory that turned her special? Was it because Kismil and that Asuna and I were able to beat the Deadly Forest Elf Knight in the retail game at all? I think it's because we tried our hardest, Asuna murmured. I looked up with a start. You and Kismil and I fought as hard as we could, believing we could win. That was the hardest I've ever concentrated in any battle I came to Einkrad. Even more than the floor boss. As a gamer, I was used to the idea that an auto-lose event could never be overturned, no matter how hard one tried, but I couldn't come out to put that into words. Yeah, exactly. You were really something during that fight. After putting that much effort into it, you'd expect to get a really great piece of loot or two out of the deal. Just so you know, I wasn't doing it expecting to be rewarded with items, she retorted, raising a fist. I laughed and apologized. Sword Art Online wasn't like all other RPGs I'd played. It was a deadly game with no logout button and the world's first VR MMORPG. If I stuck to my preconceived notions of how things should be, I was missing out on what was in front of my own eyes. I gave Asuna a serious look and asked, "Can we at least take some time to think about what to do with the crystal bottle info? Like I said, I don't want to just keep it a secret forever, but as long as I know it might be a source of trouble, I want to keep your safety first and foremost." I expected her to bite back with a snarky reassurance that she wasn't a newbie anymore and could take care of herself. And I even went so far as to prepare for a further statement to back my case. But Asuna only looked back at me in silence, then turned away in a huff. I couldn't just barely see her mouth move behind her long, hanging bangs. "Well, if that's what you want to do, then fine." "Oh, you're okay with that?" I was so surprised by her answer that I wondered what she was thinking and leaned over to my right side to see around the side of her face. Instead, Asuna turned harder to her left, evading my gaze, until she was seated completely backwards, facing onto the sofa. What's going on here? I had a feeling that if I didn't take it easy, the fencer was going to explode, so I sat back up properly and said, Anyway, let's take a little rest now. How we meet up at the cafe on the first floor at 6 o'clock? Asuna nodded silently and slipped off to the sofa. Her back was still facing me. She got up and placed the crystal ball of Kela into her inventory, then left the room without ever facing me. What button of hers had I pressed? I sank into the sitting position. 5 seconds later, I had removed all my gear and sent a single instant message. Laid down at the bed by the window, I fell asleep. When the alarm I set rudely woke me up, the light of the room color was sunset. I slowly sat up and rolled up the curtains to look down the teleport plaza of Rovia in my second-story vantage point. In just 3 hours, the square had filled up with countless players. Frontline members peered at the NPC shop whereas tourists nourished on food and carts. Romantic-looking couples sat at the benches facing the water. This was the 45th day since the game of death had begun, and it felt like both long and short, but I considered it to be a good thing that matters had settled down enough for people to consider themselves a couple. This was my most magnanimous opinion as frustrated middle school boy. Meanwhile, I noticed a particularly long line at the gondola dock up at the south. Ugh, crap, I forgot, I moaned, kneeling on the bed. I should have expected this. There were only so many gondolas, so too many players appeared. It was inevitable a line would form. I would have to get accustomed to the idea that moving around Rovia would take much more time than usual. At the very least, I was relieved to see that so many people could be crammed into a limited space and lining up politely without any trouble. No sooner had the thought occurred than a group of 5 armed players attempting to push their way to the front of the line get on one of the larger gondolas that was just pulling in. Naturally, the group was being protested, but the large greatsword-wielding leader of the offending group was shouting back just as angrily. I could hear them from the distant second-story inn room, but I could imagine what was being said.
"We're fighting to liberate you normal players. Our needs should come first."
The tourists in the simple cloth gear had no choice but to unhappily let them go. The man and his partner brandished their gleaming metal equipment in a show of might and leaped onto the gondola. As the boat left the wharf, I muttered to myself, that was a bad move, half. The quintet that had cut the line, wearing all blue doublets, were the members of the Dragon Knights Brigade, a frontline guild that had just been established on the 3rd floor, and the man with the great sword at the lead was Hafner, one of the guild's officers. They had probably just finished resupplying the opening quests in town, and were ready to start conquering the floor of the Earnest. I could understand how warriors on a mission might be frustrated with waiting around in line behind tourists with no greater purpose. But if there was one thing to avoid, it was the frontline population acting like it was special and earning the disdain of everyone else. One never knew if those hadn't been swinging swords, yet might one day emerge from the safety of the town and reach the frontier of their own will and ability. In fact, if that never happened, we could beat the game. The frontier group was barely 50 strong at this point, and would certainly get bogged down eventually. We needed as many people as possible helping to advance the human progress in the game. I stifled a sigh and checked the time. Only 3 minutes left until our meeting up at 6 o'clock. Crawling out of bed, I outfitted myself with the usual gear and plodded out of the room. When I came to face with Asuna for the first time in 3 hours below, she was back at the usual cool attitude. Sorry about the wait, I said, taking the seat across from her. There were no players in the cafe aside from us. Clearly the view paled in comparison to what was outside. I just got here, she said flatly, then slid the menu over to me, and I saw, aside from the drinks and sweets, they had a few items that looked like fish. Should we get an early dinner here? I want to get something to eat from the carts outside. Okay, drinks only. Then, or would you rather just leave? That's fine with me. It didn't seem like there was something different about her, but we hadn't been working together long enough for me to be sure, so I set it aside and I got up. It was poor form to meet up at a coffee shop in the real world and leave without ordering anything, but the NPC waiters here just watched us off without any complaint. We left the inn without checking out. The underside of the floor above was somewhere between those rose and indigo. Within under 30 minutes, it would probably be dark out. But if anything, the gondola line on the other end of the square was even longer. The stone buildings were lit up with lanterns, whose light effects of the water in the entrance display. Perhaps nighttime was considered to be the peak of boating business here. Well, you can see the line. Still want to queue up, or should we forget about gondolas and just swim ourselves? I stopped as soon as I felt the cold glare under the hood. Or not. I guess we should line up for a trip to the market area. But first I want to visit the food carts. Right. We made our way over to the east and end of the square, where 5 or 6 stylish little carts were arranged. From what I could tell, only 3 of them were selling food that might make for a dinner. There was a meal set of fresh fried fish, cooked veggies, a seafood pizza with squid and shellfish, and a panini sandwich with grilled fish and herbs. I see. So the main style of food on this floor is fish, I noted. Don't like fish? I shook my head hastily. No, it's not that. It's more that I was hoping for a few traditional choices, like boiled fish or sashimi. You know you're not going to get choices like that in a town like this. Good point. I'll have to hold out hope for the 10th floor. I think I'll go for the panini. What about you? Sounds good to me, too. You want to wait at the bench while I buy them? Asuna gave me another upward glance beneath her hood, then turned away. What's going on here? I feel like the time when she ate cream bread down in Tolbana on the 1st floor. The paninis were 12 kohl each at the cart. I bought 2 and returned to the bench, handed one to Asuna, then stopped her when I noticed that she was opening her trade window to pay me for the sandwich. No, it's on me. Why? Because I'll owe you for making me the swimsuit. Fortunately, she nodded and accepted my offer. She was still acting weird, but at least she wasn't angry with me. I was just about to sit down next to her, shaking my head in confusion, when someone's hand stuck out from the darkness behind us, and teasing voice sounded in my ear.
Think ye kindly, keyboy. I've been hungry.
I wasn't sure whether to play it cool, your hiding's as good as ever, or be honest and reject her. No, that's my dinner. So, the result had a bit of both columns. Your hiding's as good as ever, but that's my dinner, and no, you can't have any.
So you'll buy one for her, but not for me. I see how it is.
What? You heard what I said? That was thanks for her making me an item. It has nothing to do with showing favor on anyone. A short female player materialized out of the darkness, wearing a plain beige hood and cape much like Asana's. Her eyes were hidden behind her curly bangs, but the 3 whiskers drawn with the face paint on either cheek left no uncertainty about who it was. Argo the Rat, information dealer, leaped over the back of the bench with a grin on her face and sat next to Asana. She looked to her left and lifted the hood back a bit.
Evening, A-chan. Good work with the 3rd floor boss and the 4th floor gate.
Good evening, Argo. Would you like some of this? Asana asked, offering up her own panini. Argo cackled and shook her head in denial.
No, I appreciate the offer. Eat up.
Okay. Asana looked as if she wasn't sure whether Argo was hungry or not. I sighed and decided to set her at ease. Don't worry about it, Asana. Her teasing skill is the best in Aincrad. Teasing? Asana recognized something about this scene, looking up at me and then at her panini in her hands, then Argo on her right side.
It is not like that, Argo. We are not at all in any way like that. No, I get it.
She laughed creepily. I plopped down on the bench to Argo's right and quietly clinched the message. It's true. Don't go selling any further funny rumors.
Why, that hurts. You know it's not my style to sell rumors and gossip.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, the fact that you're here must mean you've got all the intel you needed.
You bet. In fact, it took just 3 hours from your message to look up what you wanted. So I just figured I might earn me a free meal in addition to my fee. But
she had me over the coals. After all, I told her I wanted it ASAP, just before I passed out for a quick nap. Fine, what do you want?
Gosh, I sure could use a nice cheesy pizza,
she started, before the sentence could finish, as I dashed at a sprint to the seafood pizza cart, bought one with 3 times the cheese, and then bolted back to the bench. Sorry about all the trouble. This is a mere token of my gratitude. I presented the pizza with a flourish, and Argo grinned back at me.
Very good, sir.
Then, let's talk as we eat. Chow that down before it gets cold, Asana. I called to the fencer on the other side of Argo. The 3 of us said grace and started scarfing down our Italian-style dinner. I had never eaten a true panini in real life, but between the crispy, chewy bread, the fragrant grilled whitefish, and the herb-scented tomato sauce, it seemed like this was probably a pretty good recreation of one. Now, if only the main ingredients were a nice thick slab of meat and a thick teriyaki mayo sauce. Both Asana and Argo were hungry, and we each gobbled down half the meal before we finally stopped to breathe. Before I could prompt her, Argo pulled out a scroll and parchment from one of the many pouches at her waist and held it out between her fingers.
Normally I'd charge you extra for quick service, but I'll go with the normal rate this time. As a thanks for this pile of cheese you brought me. That's 500 coal.
I pulled out the gold coin I'd stored in my coat pocket for just this occasion and handed it to Argo. Tapping the scroll she handed me caused it to automatically unfurl. What information did you request from her? Asuna asked, leaning over. I showed her the illustration of the scroll, a detailed map of Rovia. Argo herself hadn't drawn this map. However, anyone could produce the same thing by simply walking all over the town, then copying the map data to a scroll item like this. The difference was that Argo's map had about 20 exclamation point markers placed all over the town. This was what the 500 coal paid for. Are those all quest NPCs? Asuna wondered. As astute as ever, I nodded silently and got back an exasperated glance in return. Well, I hate to be hard on Argo, but since she did all the work, but you couldn't find all this stuff just by walking around town, and we'll need to visit those spots to start the quest anyway. That was my assumption as well. And didn't you already finish all these quests in the beta, key boy? The thing is, I murmured, my mouth full of panini. I feel like the longer I walk around the town, the more my old memories will fade. I just wanted to be able to see locations all at once like this. Oh. There was more than a hint of entertainment in Argo's voice. I chose to stare at the map of the town rather than indulge her. As I suspected, the layout of the town itself was exactly the same. I tapped each icon in turn, remembering the dry, dusty form the settlement used to take. With each tap appeared a quick quest rundown written by Argo. Once I had examined all of them, I pointed out a single marker in the north corner of the map. This one. What about it? Asuna asked, suspiciously. I grinned at her. This quest wasn't there in the beta. This is the spot that the key to this town, to conquering this entire floor. If you get all the intel on this quest, I'll buy it off you, Argo had offered. With a lingering whiff of cheese, she melted back into the darkness. Austin and I finished the last scraps of our sandwiches and got up from the bench to watch the dock to the south. The line looked a little bit shorter than before, but it was a good 30-minute wait. Thanks to the power of a full stomach and a conversation with Argo, Asuna had recovered to her normal mood. She noted, I don't mind lining up, but that dock has a terrible system. Oh, what about it? The little two-seater and the big 10-person boats both stop at the same place. It's taking extra time because one person will end up riding the big gondolas, and then the layer of groups have to split it up and take multiple smaller ones. They ought to at least split the people up into different lines. Good point. So, should we propose that idea? That's not really my style. I don't know. You've got a real class rep style attitude, so I bet people will. I let the rest of that sentence hang while I felt Asuna's chilling laser beam stare in my face. The nighttime sights of Rovia were truly enchanting now, as the colorful lamps and windows and lights of the town glimmered off the surface of the dark water. Even the gondolas, full of smiling players, had lanterns of their own, sitting on the prow and stern of small ones and the overlapping roofs of larger ones. The sight of the gondolas crossing in the canal was so beautiful that... Ah! I snapped my fingers, suddenly the idea lighting up in my brain. What? This way. I'll explain later. I prodded Asuna's back and trotted toward the wharf at the north end, the opposite direction from the dock. There was no boat landing here, so the drop from the piled stone fence to the water was quite far, but that also meant the gondolas were floating quite low. I have a bad feeling about this, Asuna muttered, trying to back away. I grabbed the hem of her cape tight. Don't worry, it'll be fine. It is not fine, I don't like it. You'll be perfectly all right. Do it by yourself if you're so keen on it, she shouted. I glanced left and glanced right. Within a few seconds, one of the large 12-seat gondolas came chugging closer on the right. Luckily enough, another gondola, the same size, was actually approaching from the left. I calculated where the two would pass, given that the traffic seemed to move from the right side here, then moved us 3 yards to the left and the 5 yards back. I'll give you a 5-second countdown. I told you I don't want to do this. That's funny, Asuna. I could have sworn you had a higher agility than me. You know that's not fair to bring up. This should be easy for you, Asuna. I mean, since you have the sprint skill and everything. But I just switched that one out for... fine. And 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. At 0, we started running. I had a low fence in stride and launched off with my right foot. All the traffic in the canal of Rovia traveled on the right side, so I leapt and stretched out for one of the gondolas approaching on the left. Once I had just barely landed on my tiptoes, the gondola shook fiercely, and the passengers below shouted in alarm. I yelled a quick apology and cut across the roof to leap again. In midair, I glanced back to see Asuna was keeping up. She had better jumping power than I did, so she should be able to land on the second gondola coming from the right. The people riding this gondola must have already noticed a display of ninja acrobatics going overhead as they applauded and whistled at the sight of Asuna leaping gracefully through the night sky. Glad that we weren't being yelled at, I raced across the roof and jumped for the third time. But, the far bank was farther than I thought. I scrambled my limbs in midair, stretched my arms as far as I could until I just barely caught the lip of the wall with my fingertips. As my entire body slammed against the wall, I heard a light footfall over my head. When I looked up, I saw Asuna standing safe and sound above me, her hands on her hips and a disappointed look on her face. "If you weren't sure you could make it, you shouldn't have tried," she scolded. I couldn't be bothered to answer her. I had a very sudden and clear understanding of exactly why the passengers in the gondola had been cheering. Asuna. What? You're, in a bit of danger, angularly speaking. What do you mean? Asuna trailed off, looking down suspiciously at me as I hung there next to her feet, then suddenly went red enough that I could see it, even in the darkness. She quickly put her hands down over the hem of her skirt, then smiled for some reason, and lifted one of her boots. "Better climb up, quick, before I step on you." Okay, coming up. I scrambled up the wall in a hurry. Rovia had a square layout, with the main channels and intersection. Technically, the teleporter gate was square in the center of town, so there was no actual intersection, and split the town into quarters. If the north was the top of the town, and the top right was the sightseeing area, with a park, a plaza, and an outdoor theater, the bottom right was the market area, crammed full of a variety of businesses. The bottom left was the lodging area, with inns large and small. And the top left quadrant, where we were now, was the downtown area, where NPCs lived. Naturally, each quarter had small canals that split up into requiring the use of a boat to getting around farther. But circling gondolas passed every stretch of water, so we decided to flag down a 2-seat boat. This time, we gave the NPC gondolier coordinates instead of a name, paid the fee by automatic half and half calculation, then warily sat down into a 2 seats. The fencer, in the miniskirt, was in much better mood in the instant she sat down at the prow, and she began to take in the sights of the town, with sparkles in her eyes. This was the most plain of all the areas in Rovia, but even the practical, homely residential sector had its own charm. Children played with toy boats at the waterside of their entrance porch, while a mother and a baby bird somewhere between a duck and a seagull swam past. Evening sounds and smells wafted through the kitchen and windows. A warm orange light shone off the water. "Ooh, that house is for sale!" I looked where Asuna was pointing and saw a small 2-story house with a wooden sign, "For sale." "Hey, you're right. So there are player houses here. I wonder how much it costs," she wondered, her eyes sparkling even brighter. I snorted wryly. "I wouldn't look at the price if I were you. You can only be disappointed. I know it'll be expensive, but I'm free to keep it in mind as something I can get if I work hard enough." Sure, that's true, but I wouldn't recommend buying it in this town. It's fun, pretty place for sightseeing, but actually living here would be tough when it comes to getting around, I noted. Asuna took that advice to heart surprisingly fast. Good point. I wonder what the people here do on their daily shopping and such. Maybe they just swim around when we're not watching.
Come on, don't ruin the illusion. But what if I do decide to get the house? I'll save up for a normal one with the view of a lake, she announced, then faced forward again. I was more of an option than the money you could use to buy a player house was better spent on a cheap inn lodgings and better gear, but given Asana's proactive nature, I could certainly see her with a lakeside residency someday. Maybe she would even let me crash on her couch. No, definitely not. Meanwhile, the gondola wove its way through the narrow channels right and left, deposited us at our destination in under 10 minutes. Beyond the tiny dock was a very large, very old building. Aside from the large double doors facing the water, it appeared just to be a plain old house without any notable features. I approached the building cautiously and peered into the dirty window. Inside was an equally messy room. In the back, there was looked like to be an old man sitting on the floor, facing the other direction. I thought I could see the golden exclamation mark over his head. This was our quest NPC. I'm surprised Argo was able to spot him, Asana commented. I agreed. This was more than just good instincts. Anyway, let's go inside. I went to the front door and knocked twice. After a good 5 seconds, the brusque man replied, "It's not locked. Come in if you want something." This feels like a real pain in the ass, I thought to myself as I opened the ancient door. Inside, we were greeted by an old man in a rocking chair that seemed ready to fall apart at any moment, with a bottle of booze in one hand and a pipe in the other. Technically, all he did was glare at us with one eye, so it wasn't even a greeting. His wispy, balding hair and scraggly beard was both white, but his skin was well burned by the sun, and the muscles of his arms and chest were taut. He looked like an old sailor who'd once boasted of his strength and was now retired, drowning in liquor. Asa and I shared a look, in which we saw the message, "This one's all on you," in her eyes. I hesitated and tried to say the magic quest words. Sir, can I help you with anything?" The old man took a shrug from his bottle and grumbled, "Nope." There was no change in the mark over his head in the quest log. If he didn't respond with the usual prompt, this meant there was a type of quest you were supposed to arrive at after hearing from stories all over town. Following the proper trail would give us the right keyword to engage him. But since we use Argo's supernatural sense of smell to sniff out the quest, we'd bypass the natural process, and I didn't know what I should say in order to advance the story. Perhaps we ought to withdraw, go collect information, but since we'd spent our time and 50 gold to get here, it would be a waste to leave empty-handed. I looked around in the large room, hoping to find some kind of hint. In a properly clean place, anything out of line would be apparent quite soon, but this room was anything but. There were so many weird items, it was impossible to tell which one might actually be a hint to the story. Wall hangings of huge fish, shacks of animal pelts, and rusty harpoons, lumber of all sizes, pots with unknown contents, oars snapped in the middle. I couldn't make any kind of guess other than he was a former sailor. Just as I was about to give up and do things the right way, Asana spoke. "You really shouldn't leave things like this on the floor, sir." She picked up something off the ground right next to her leg of the rocking chair. A half-rusted nail about 4 inches long. It had probably fallen out of the decrepit old chair. The man took the nail in her hand and snorted angrily. For some reason, then tilted back more of his drink. Asana looked back at me for help, but it could only grimace. "Just put it on the table or something." "Okay." She nodded and moved her arm to drop it, but I snatched the nail away without thinking. What? Hang on. This isn't just a nail. It's not a throwing pick either. It's a square nail. Where have I seen something like this before? I muttered to myself, pieces of information connecting within my brain. Large double doors facing the water, leather and wood inside the room. A collection of items I'd seen in a real-life museum years ago. A quest that didn't exist in the beta. This man's not a former sailor.
I faced him head on and took a deep breath. Sir, can you build us a boat?